The U.S. State Department is suspending visa processing from 75 countries, including Russia, Brazil, and Iran. The pause is indefinite and will begin January 21st.
To soccer now, where some fans say they're boycotting the upcoming World Cup games in the U.S. The local World Cup committee has been expecting hundreds of thousands of visitors to travel to the Metro when the matches kick off in 5 months.
John, what we're seeing right now is when politics and global sports collide. We saw recently President Trump added 2 more soccer nations to the travel ban. Senegal and the Ivory Coast join the list of countries that are banned from coming to the United States. Iran and Haiti are the 2 others.
My feeling is boycott it.
Really?
Honestly, I think the World Cup is a joke. I think FIFA giving Donald Trump a big rosette and a peace prize has undermined everything that football's about. I think the fact that it's being played in a country that's threatening not to give visas to the players, to the staff, to the fans, I think it's ridiculous. I think it's a complete embarrassment.
The world is preparing for the largest World Cup in history, but beneath the excitement lies a quieter, more consequential story. A story about borders, mobility, and the shifting balance of power in North America. A story about how a global sporting event is colliding with a new era of geopolitical tension. And a story about what happens when the world's most watched tournament meets the world's most complex immigration system. The 2026 World Cup was meant to symbolize global unity. Instead, it is revealing something deeper: the way nations manage movement, the way they project security, and the way they navigate a world where even a football match cannot escape the gravity of geopolitics. The 2026 World Cup was never going to be just a sporting event. It is the largest tournament in the history of football, hosted across 3 countries, spanning more than 100 matches, and requiring the movement of millions of people across borders. It arrives at a moment when global mobility is tightening, geopolitical blocs are hardening, and immigration policy has become a central axis of domestic politics in the United States. In this environment, even administrative decisions, visa categories, entry requirements, security screenings, become geopolitical signals. The United States' decision to tighten visa rules in early 2026, affecting short-term visitors from dozens of countries, including several with qualified national teams, is not an isolated policy choice. It is part of a broader structural shift in how the US manages borders, security, and global engagement. The implications for the World Cup are not merely logistical. They are geopolitical, economic, and symbolic. The verified facts are straightforward. In February 2026, the United States implemented a series of visa and entry screening adjustments that immigration analysts had been anticipating for months. These changes were not explicitly tied to the World Cup, but their timing, 4 months before the tournament, ensured they would intersect with it. The new rules tightened screening for short-term visitors from 39 countries, including Senegal, Ivory Coast, Haiti, and Iran. They expanded visa bonds for applicants deemed high risk under new criteria. They introduced stricter ESTA rules, affecting travelers from countries that previously enjoyed streamlined entry. And they lengthened processing times for certain categories of visitor visas. The State Department has repeatedly emphasized that the United States remains committed to welcoming global visitors and that fans should apply early. But immigration law firms, including Fragaman, have publicly noted that the new rules could disrupt travel for fans from affected countries. This is the factual baseline. Everything else, the diplomatic reactions, the economic implications, potential for escalation, flows from this foundation. The global reaction has been cautious but increasingly vocal. African nations have been the most outspoken. Several of the countries affected by the tightened US rules have large football cultures and significant fan travel expectations. While no African government has issued a formal boycott threat, political commentators, former players, and federation insiders have openly discussed the possibility. The logic is straightforward: if fans cannot attend, the tournament loses legitimacy; if teams face logistical barriers, the principle of equal participation is undermined; and if African nations are disproportionately affected, the issue becomes political. This is not a confirmed boycott movement. It is a speculative but plausible trajectory if the situation deteriorates. Latin American governments have expressed frustration, particularly because millions of fans are expected to travel north. Their response has been diplomatic rather than confrontational, emphasizing expedited visa processing, special corridors for ticket holders, and assurances of equal treatment. Latin America is unlikely to lead a boycott, but it could amplify African concerns if the US does not adjust its approach. Countries in the Middle East and South Asia, regions with large diasporas in North America, have raised concerns about fairness and consistency. Their governments are not escalating publicly, but the underlying sentiment is clear. The US is projecting security over openness at a moment when global mobility is central to the tournament's success. To understand the implications, one must examine the structural incentives driving US behavior. Immigration has become a defining issue in US politics. The tightening of visa rules is part of a broader strategy to project control over borders and security. The World Cup is not the cause of these policies, it is collateral. The US security apparatus operates on the assumption that global instability increases risk. Visa tightening is a predictable response to this worldview. And unlike Qatar in 2022 or Russia in 2018, the United States is not using the World Cup as a soft power showcase. It is hosting because it can, not because it seeks global approval. This creates a tension between FIFA's expectations and US political realities. Mexico faces its own scrutiny, particularly around security in certain host cities. Yet its response to global concerns has been markedly different from the US approach. Mexico has avoided introducing new visa restrictions, emphasized openness and hospitality, and aligned publicly with FIFA's confidence in its readiness. This positions Mexico as the diplomatic stabilizer of the tournament. If global frustration with the US grows, Mexico could absorb goodwill by contrast. But Mexico's position is fragile. Security incidents could undermine confidence quickly. The country is balancing on a narrow line between reassurance and risk. Canada is hosting fewer matches than the US or Mexico, but its role in the tournament is disproportionately important. Canada benefits from a reputation for stability, a more open immigration posture, fewer security concerns, and strong institutional capacity. If visa restrictions create friction for fans traveling to the US, Canada could become the preferred destination for international supporters. This would enhance Canada's soft power and reinforce its image as the most accessible and predictable host. In a broader geopolitical sense, Canada's position in the tournament mirrors its emerging role in North America, a stabilizing force in a region where the US is increasingly inward-focused and Mexico is navigating volatility. A full boycott is unlikely. But even a partial withdrawal, one or two teams, or a significant reduction in fan attendance, would carry substantial costs. The US is hosting the majority of matches. The economic exposure includes tourism revenue, hospitality and transportation spending, local economic activity in host cities, and broadcast value tied to competitive integrity. A boycott would undermine the economic rationale for the tournament and damage the US's reputation as a reliable host. Mexico's exposure is smaller but still significant. Reduced international travel would weaken the economic justification for its investments in infrastructure and security. Canada would be the least affected economically but could gain diplomatically if it is perceived as the most. accessible host. Therefore, FIFA faces a structural dilemma. It must balance the sovereignty of host nations, the need for global participation, the economic imperatives of broadcasters and sponsors, and the political sensitivities of member federations. If visa restrictions materially affect attendance or participation, FIFA will be forced to intervene. The question is not whether FIFA wants to act, but whether it can act without escalating tensions. The intersection of tightened US visa policy and global mobility expectations creates a spectrum of possible outcomes. In the most likely scenario, the United States maintains its tightened visa posture but introduces targeted administrative adjustments such as expedited processing for ticket holders, temporary waivers for certain categories, increased staffing at consulates, and coordination with FIFA for accredited delegations. This reduces, but does not eliminate, friction. Fans from affected countries still face delays and uncertainty, but the system absorbs the pressure. Attendance remains high, though unevenly distributed. African and Middle Eastern fans experience the greatest barriers, reinforcing existing perceptions of unequal mobility. The economic impact is limited. The diplomatic impact is moderate. The reputational impact is real but manageable. This scenario aligns with the structural incentives of the United States: maintain security posture, avoid policy reversal, and rely on administrative flexibility rather than political concession. A second scenario involves escalating diplomatic tension. Visa delays become widespread enough to trigger public criticism from multiple regions. African federations issue coordinated statements. Latin American governments demand exemptions. Middle Eastern and South Asian countries raise concerns at multilateral forums. FIFA becomes involved, pressuring the US to guarantee access for fans and delegations. The US responds with limited concessions but refuses to alter the core of its visa policy. The result is a tournament overshadowed by geopolitical tension. Attendance drops in certain matches. Media coverage focuses on mobility barriers rather than sport. The US absorbs reputational damage as a host perceived as prioritizing security over global participation. This scenario is structurally plausible because it aligns with the political incentives of both sides. The US maintains its posture, while affected countries externalize domestic frustration by criticizing American policy. A third scenario, low in probability but high in impact, involves a partial boycott. A full boycott is unlikely, but a partial boycott, one or two teams withdrawing, or a coordinated refusal by fans from certain regions, cannot be dismissed entirely. The triggers include a high-profile visa denial for a player or official, widespread fan visa rejections, a perception of discriminatory treatment, or political pressure within affected countries. The consequences would be severe: disrupted group structures, contractual disputes with broadcasters, diminished competitive integrity, and long-term damage to the US as a host nation. This scenario is not predicted. It is a risk vector, a low probability, high impact outcome that shapes the behavior of all actors involved. The 2026 World Cup is not only a global event. It is a continental one. The interactions between the United States, Mexico, and Canada reveal deeper structural dynamics shaping North America. The United States is powerful but inward-focused, projecting security rather than openness. Mexico is navigating volatility while seeking diplomatic relevance. Canada is emerging as the continent's stabilizing force, benefiting from predictability and institutional strength. Visa restrictions, global reactions, and speculative boycott scenarios are not isolated phenomena. They are expressions of deeper continental dynamics. The World Cup will not reshape North America. But it will reveal North America as it is, fragmented in posture, unequal in mobility, divergent in political incentives, interconnected in economic stakes. The deeper meaning of this moment is that mobility has become a form of power. The ability to move across borders, freely, predictably, and securely, is geopolitical capital. The United States controls this capital. Its visa policies shape who can participate in global events, who can access global markets, and who can engage in global culture. This is not merely administrative. It is strategic. The tightening of US visa rules ahead of the World Cup is not an anomaly. It is a reflection of a world in which borders are hardening, security is prioritized, global mobility is stratified, and geopolitical blocs are diverging. The World Cup becomes a lens through which these structural forces are magnified. The 2026 World Cup is the largest test of global mobility since the pandemic. It will reveal whether the world can still sustain large-scale, cross-border events in an era of rising geopolitical tension. 3 questions define this test. Can global mobility function under tightened security regimes? Can international institutions like FIFA manage political friction, and can host nations balance domestic priorities with global expectations? The answers will shape not only the tournament but the future of global events. The tournament will proceed. Fans will travel. Matches will be played. But beneath the spectacle lies a structural truth. Global events now operate within the constraints of a world where mobility is contested, security is prioritized, and geopolitical tensions shape even the most universal of human activities. The 2026 World Cup is not just a competition. It is a stress test for globalization, and a preview of the geopolitical landscape that will define the next decade.